as I mentioned before, this concludes the speakers on our panel about the findings on the situation of apartheid. And we will have shortly a question and answer session. But before we do that, the last thing we want to do is have an additional contribution and invite a member of ICJP's advisory board to the podium to address the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh. Now, I introduce his remarks as being in addition to the panel on apartheid, but it's clear that her killing is integrally linked to the situation of apartheid, and therefore this contribution to the discussion is very important. Therefore, I'd like to introduce Wadah Khanfar, who is, as I said before, a board member of ICJP and a board member of International Crisis Group, and he is the chairman of the board of the Common Action Forum. Wadah is the co-founder and president of Sharq Forum and the former director general of Al Jazeera Network. He began his career at Al Jazeera in 1997, covering some of the world's key political zones, including South Africa, Afghanistan, and Iraq. He was appointed the chief of the Baghdad Bureau and later as the network's managing director. In 2006, he became Al Jazeera's director general. During his 8-year tenure at the helm, the network transformed from a single channel into a media network, including Al Jazeera Arabic, Al Jazeera English, Al Jazeera Documentary, and Al Jazeera Center for Studies. Wadah resigned from the network in September 2011 and and since that time he's been named as one of Foreign Policy's top 100 global thinkers of 2011, as well as one of Fast Company's most creative people in business of the year. He has a diverse academic background with postgraduate studies in philosophy, African studies, and international politics. And I'd like to welcome him to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you for International Center of Justice for Palestinians. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening to all of you. Yes, I joined Al Jazeera in 1997. Al Jazeera was launched by the end of 1996. Just it was, a few months after it was launched. It was exactly the same year when Shireen Abu Akleh joined Al Jazeera. The difference is I was a reporter for Al Jazeera in the post-apartheid South Africa. 1997 is the year when the new constitution of Free South Africa came to effect. It was the year when we were reporting about the truth and reconciliation in South Africa, the great hope of new justice and equality, and the new spirit that was established. Unfortunately, Shireen Abu Akleh was reporting from a thriving, not recognized apartheid in Palestine. That was the big difference. I remember that when I am a Palestinian myself, I was reporting from South Africa, it was always in my mind, when our people will live the same experience that the Africans, the coloreds, the Indians, and even the whites are living right now in South Africa. To say that Israel was an apartheid state then was impossible, simply because centers of power, and we are not naive, it's not about knowledge, it's about geopolitics, it's about interests, it's about hegemonic nature of the world order and the centers of power and the Western dominance that created impunity for Israel, so no one can really describe it as it is. And of course, the layers of lies and illusions created around the Palestinian issue, and the endless process of the so-called peace, endless conferences and endless meetings of something that was never meant to reach a conclusion. You know, that was how the world saw the vague image of the Palestinian struggle for justice and for peace in Palestine. Of course, South Africa at that time was going through something else. In 1987, the South African police raided a funeral of an activist who was killed in South Africa, in Cape Town, 20 years old, and they tried to take off the coffin, the flag, the ANC flag that was wrapped around the coffin. Of course, funerals for activists were banned in South Africa. So that was an iconic image of the South African apartheid police attacking funerals and attacking that particular funeral that later on became one of the most iconic memories of the South Africans. And Nelson Mandela, when he was released, he actually acknowledged that. 7 years later, a former terrorist designated in most of the international capitals as a terrorist became the president of South Africa. We know him now as the great Nelson Mandela. 7 years later, the coffin of Shireen Abu Akleh was attacked, and all of us saw. In my opinion, that was the iconic image of our time. And this is what's going to reside in the memory, not only of the Palestinian people, and I promise you, Palestinians have excellent memory, really, but it's going to reside in every mind and for every age from now on. That was the naked truth of the apartheid regime that dehumanized the Palestinians and does not even care about the world, because the world has given that regime impunity. So they could do whatever they would like to do in front of cameras if it is needed, because who else can hold them accountable? Now, Shireen, for 25 years, reported the story of the Palestinians. We journalists don't like to be the story. We're supposed to write and to report about others, about victims of war, about those who plan and execute the war, about the conditions of people, but we're supposed not to be the story. Unfortunately, Shireen, like many other journalists, Palestinian journalists, were killed as well in Palestine, became the story. And she wrote her final report with her own blood. Why Shireen became the symbol of unity for the Palestinians? Shireen was not a political activist. She was not that emotional reporter who is trying to create emotional and try to introduce to the public something beyond professional standards. She was actually the most professional one I have ever worked with. She was very professional. But there was something important. The Palestinians wanted their narrative to be objectively presented to the world. And Shireen did that. We had many other people who reported on Palestine in different style and way, but they did not have that kind of status in the minds and the hearts of the Palestinian people. What does this tell us? It tells us that the Palestinian people at this moment in time have reached a level of maturity and a level of confidence that their story, when it is reported objectively, without bias, is going to create difference. That's what Shireen Abu Akleh was for the people. For those who do not know what happened that day when the coffin was attacked by the Palestinians, yes, the coffin was carried by all sectors of the Palestinian people, by the Muslims and the Christians. And the funeral was joined by everyone, the rich and the poor, the young and the old, the men and women, people who have ideological backgrounds in various political landscape, all of them joined. And that was a unique moment. This is the true Palestinian nation, the nation that you saw that day. And the opposite side, the true Israeli apartheid that you saw that day in the eyes of the police and forces that attacked the demonstrators. That was the image. We don't really, as you said, need to sink deep into a lot of legal terminology. I am not a lawyer myself, thanks God. But I must say, it is very clear to all of us. We knew it was apartheid. The world did not recognize it. A lot of the people in the world knew it, but they did not dare to recognize it. I think right now, thanks to the great effort of Beth Salem, Human Rights Watch, and Amnesty, and many other organizations, we have a narrative that we can speak to the world about. Israel is an apartheid state. Legally, politically, and morally, it is an apartheid state that we, the people, should work and act in order to make it mainstream. Yes, 10 Downing Street, the White House, and many others will not soon going to do so. But we should be frank with ourselves. And I would like to end with something. My colleagues, the journalists in the West, again and again, please live up to the moral standards of integrity of this profession. When your colleague was killed, Shireen Abu Akleh, in Palestine, no one from those who were there, and we had many journalists, and we had many witnesses, all of them said the Israeli soldier shot her, the sniper. No one said the Palestinians shot her. Until recently, maybe until now, a lot of mainstream media organizations in London, in Washington, in New York, in many other capitals in the West, still argue that we don't know exactly for sure who did kill Shireen Abu Akleh. Really? Shame on those who cannot take the Palestinians as well as a source like every other one. The dehumanization of Palestinians over decades reached many levels, and amongst that, unfortunately, media circles. We need, at least, I'm not now addressing politicians, I'm addressing journalists who thought that they are actually the people who are trying to live up to certain standards of dignity, of integrity, of morality. I think we need to be frank with ourselves. We have also practiced a form of apartheid. And we have taken that story of apartheid beyond the regime of Israel into another level. I think we should be frank with ourselves, and we should repent from this great sin. The Palestinians are a mature nation. The Palestinians have great patience, and they have also, as I said, great memory. And today, we have also great narrative that we are speaking to the world about. So please help the Palestinians to take this narrative to the world. I would like to end by saying, I stood one day in this panel, in this place, to commemorate the murder of a great journalist called Jamal Khashoggi. That was 4 years ago. Today, I stand to commemorate the death of my colleague, Shireen Abu Aqla. During the last 4 years, a new alliance in the Middle East emerged between authoritarian regimes and the apartheid regime of Israel. Both have agreed, in principle, to establish a system that dominate, suppress, and suffocate every call for democracy, for freedom, for human rights, and for liberation. And I think the world, we, the people who care about the world, should also be united in a front, in an international front, to work and to work very hard for the sake of the future of our children and the future of humanity in order to counter that alliance of authoritarian apartheid system. Thank you very much.